Web of dreams. I want to start off by saying these dreams I've had over the past few years occurred out of the order I have them here, but as you'll see, it was made clear to me in multiple ways that the way these dreams are supposed to be understood are in a chronological sense. Secondly, I want to say that some details may be missing or altered from the original dream. This is because most of them happened at least more than a year ago. So for one thing, my memory is bound to mess at least some of this up. And for another, I read a study once explaining a theory that no past event in your life is exactly how you remember it. Anyway, without further ado, my web of connected dreams. What I believe to be the first dream in a chronological sense, I had only about 2 or 3 years ago. I believe it to be that part of the set due to the fact that everyone in the dream was a much younger version of themselves than they were at the time of this dream. This dream also is by far the least eerie of the set, but it is important that I include it as a form of context. This dream begins at some sort of show or ceremony. It might have been a wedding, or it could have been a concert or something like that. I can't really remember, mostly because it hardly had any relevance to the dream itself. Anyway, this show took place on a stage, basically in the middle of a grassy field with no end in sight. Nothing on the horizon, just endless barrenness. Everyone at this show was related to me. My family, my cousins, my grandparents, even great-grandparents took up the entire audience, and I never saw who was actually on the stage. While the parents and elders were sitting on blankets in front of the stage watching the show, my cousins, 2 of them, my second cousins, 3, my brothers, 2, and I were behind the stage, playing some sort of game, like tag or something. We all noticed that about a quarter mile away, there was some type of stone, shed-like structure. Our curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to take a visit. There was no door on this structure, and it was only about 7 meters wide and 10 meters tall, or something like that. We observed it from all angles, and my brother noticed that at one of the bottom vertices had a large hole that appeared to open up into some kind of large tunnel. This tunnel was at least 10 meters tall and wide, so once again, we decided to explore. At this point, my second cousins were taken back to the show by their parents. It was now just me, my cousins, and my brothers. After a few minutes of unsuccessfully trying to convince my second cousin's parents to let them stay, the rest of us turned back to the tunnel and noticed that one of my first cousins, who I'll call Tom for the sake of his privacy, had already ran inside. We were all like 5 years old in the dream, so this sort of move made sense. We realized we needed to go find him, so without hesitation, we headed into the tunnel. This is where my first dream ended. The next one happened a good 5 years ago or so. I know it takes place next because the same people were present. Tom was still missing, and we'd just entered the tunnels. We could still see the entrance light. We walked around for a while, and eventually it got dim, but scattered throughout the tunnel were torches on the walls. We came to an intersection between 2 paths and decided to split up. Me and my youngest brother, who I'll call John, went right, and my other cousin and older brother, who I'll call Lucy and Steve, went left. John and I walked for at least an hour through plenty of twists and turns. The tunnel slowly got a lot deeper into the ground, and we eventually came to another intersection. We decided that the best idea would be to stick together, so we both just went left together. There was a sharp turn, like 80 degrees, with a strong source of light coming from around the bend. We slowly peeked around the bend and saw this strange sort of creature. It seemed to be at least 7 feet tall. and it seemed to have the same type of features as a human would, just slightly distorted and unproportional. It was made of some sort of dark material. I can only describe its skin by saying it appeared to be made of some type of root. The last main feature of this thing was the source of light. Its neck appeared to split into two roots, and those roots separated and then came back together to form the same basic proportion to the rest of its body as a head would. Between these two roots was some type of orb which cast a very bright light onto the walls of the tunnel and was the only possible way to see, as there were no more torches. One of its hands were free, but the other one was holding some kind of small box by a handle. It didn't see us, as it appeared to be walking in the opposite direction of us, but it seemed to hear us, as it began to turn around before John and I ran the other direction. We obviously didn't want anything to do with this thing. We arrived back at the intersection, and this time went the other possible direction. That was where that dream ended. The next dream, I'm sure, comes next in the story, because it begins just as I and John are walking into the other possible tunnel path. We're still talking about the creature we'd just seen. This other path had a few torches, so we could see slightly better. This tunnel led into a very large open area, at least the size of a baseball stadium. We were pretty deep, but it expanded to the surface, and it had holes in the top with sunlight shining through, so it was fairly bright. On the other side of this opening were my parents. Strange, since they were watching that show, Lucy and Steve. This meant that most likely all the pathways eventually led to this room. John and I ran our way over to the others, and they were sitting in old wooden chairs around a large rock, flat enough to be used as a table. We talked for a while, trying to figure out what was going on. John said at one point, "I'm hungry. Did anyone bring snacks?" My dad pointed over to an area where someone appeared to be selling food. I walked over with John, and it was some tall, pale man I didn't recognize. He was mumbling about a box, and my guess was that he meant the box that the creature had from before. We asked for food, and he yelled at us, demanding we leave the castle. At this point, some loud, booming sound, almost like a creaking door, but deeper and more explosive, if that makes sense, echoed through the cave. My relatives and I looked around, slightly terrified, trying to find the source of this sound, and the pale man whimpered and ran into one of the tunnels. John and I ran back to the others at the table, and that's where that dream ended. The penultimate dream in the series was by far the most frightening for me. It's hard to put into words exactly what happened in this one, and it probably won't have the same terrifying effect through writing, but I'll try my best. As soon as I arrived back at the table with the rest of my family members, a blinding flash of light came through the seams in the surface, and when the brightness had worn off, the cave had become pitch black, or so I thought. I was no longer in the cave as far as I know. I could have been in some type of void for all I can tell. All I know for sure is that I couldn't see anything. Pitch black, with faint fog blocking me from seeing anything more than a few feet from me. I walked around for a moment, calling for my parents. Suddenly, another one of those creatures came running at me from the fog, scaring me out of my wits, and just before colliding with me, disappeared into a cloud of smoke. A few moments later, this happened again, but the creature made some muffled yelling noise. The yelling sounded almost human, as if a human were trapped under the roots the monster was composed of. This happened a few more times, each time getting louder and more frequent. The other thing I noticed was that the fog turned into some type of indescribable mist, similar to the noise/static of a TV screen with no signal. After what felt to me at the time like hours of this alone, all the fog, all the monsters, everything vanished. I was in the dark again, unable to see anything except for a small box in the distance, a small box with a handle. I knew from looking at it that it was the one the monster had, the first monster I saw. It seemed to have some glow emitting from it. I started to walk over to it. I started hearing faint whispers saying something like, "The cure." The closer I got to the box, the more repetitive and louder they became. They seemed to overlap each other by the time I'd reached the box. I reached down to grab it, and I heard the same booming echo I'd heard before in the cave. It was definitely louder this time though. I also saw a bright flash of light, and that's where the dream ended. The final dream of this series is actually the first nightmare I've ever had in my entire life. Now I place it here at the end, and you'll see why in a moment, but I honestly do not have any idea where this dream places in a storyline sense. I don't recommend reading into this dream to try and figure out what it all meant. It'll only give you a headache, as it did for me. Without further ado, my final dream. The dream started off on a regular planet Earth, a strange setting considering all the other dreams. I was in Tom's neighborhood, and I was on my way to his house. I had the box in my right hand, and it had a note taped on the top labeled Tom. As I approached his house, I noticed birthday balloons, so I knew it was Tom's birthday. I appeared to be the first one to arrive though, since there were no other cars around the house other than his parents. I walked behind the house to the back door, and Tom's mother answered and asked me to come inside. I walked past her, and Tom was behind her. This is where the dream became a nightmare for me. I saw Tom, and there was obviously something very wrong with him. He was slightly hunched over, but just enough to look slightly inhumane. The other problem was that his face had some strange texture. The best way I can describe this texture as it appeared to have the same texture as the surface of a human brain. I could make out eyes, a mouth, a nose, ears, and all other facial features, but he was bald and he had this strange texture. As soon as I saw him, the whole area around us turned into the foggy, dark surrounding as the last dream. Instead of visual static, I could hear the static in my head. I heard Tom say, in a very low, quivering, clearly fearful voice, "There's something wrong." My eyes locked on to his deranged face. I could no longer hear the sounds of the real world, only the static. A slight, transparent static went over my vision. I saw Tom literally melt into nothing through the static. After this, the static became more dense. The sound became much louder, and that's exactly when I woke up, in a panic. I know you're thinking of the cliche that it ended all as a dream, but a lot of it felt more real than what it was. And I can't go on thinking that it didn't have any meaning. I wouldn't recommend reading too far into it, but I can't blame you for thinking about it like I do.